Avite Kohen Gadol. So we talked about Tishtei Lechem yesterday. We talked about the Lechem Hapanim yesterday. Now we're going to talk about Chavite Kohen Gadol, which is the mincha that was brought every day by the Kohen Gadol. He brought an isarin to the Beis Hamikdash in the morning, and then in the Beis Hamikdash he split it up into half of isarin. And we learned that the isarin was not a midas, was not a klishos.
Is this part of the Talmud Shachar and Ben Arbaim?
I don't think so. I think the Chavitin was like a separate. It was a separate thing because the Talmud Shel Shachar Shel Ben Arbaim had its own minchas nesachim.
Did. Oh, okay.
This is like a personal carbon that the Kohen Gadol brings.
Mm-hmm.
So the Mishnah says Chavite Kohen Gadol lishason va'arichason va'fiyason bifnim. Everything is done in the Azara. V'doichos es haShabbos, and it is doiches Shabbos, which makes sense because if it becomes kedusha kodesh with kedusha saguf, then it cannot be left overnight. Zogt Rashi, Chavite Kohen Gadol lishason v'arichason bifnim, u'ledivrei hakoil oisoi chatzi isarin shahaya chaylek boy isroinei shel kohen. Even though we said that the full isarin that everyone used to measure their soilas is not necessarily a klisharis, but the measure of a half isarin, everybody agrees that that would be a klisharis. Why didn't they make mishicha on the full isarin and make that into a klisharis as well? People, everyone used it. Everybody used it to measure their menachos. That was like the main measurement for menachos. And therefore, sometimes that measuring cup will be used chutz la'azara because people are preparing their mincha. But the chazi yisarein einei maser elo l'kohanim. The only time it's ever used is to service this mincha, which was always in the Azara. So that's why the mincha of the Kohen Gadol, the Chavitin, were definitely placed into the Klisharis. Okay. Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva. This is a very famous klal. It's not only relevant to this shaila. Kol malacha she'evshir la'asoisa ma'erev Shabbos. Any malacha that you would be able to do before Shabbos, it won't be doiches Shabbos, and you have to do it before Shabbos. You have to prepare it before Shabbos. But if it's a malacha that has to be done on Shabbos, then doiche es Shabbos. As Rashi says, meaning afiyoson, you cannot do the afiyah yesterday, and you cannot set up the dough either. The kivin the kitcha bechli, once this flour is going to be kaddish with kedusha saguf because it was placed into the klisharis of a half a sarin mivsal belina. Let's have just a quick peek at Tosfos. Klal Amar Rabbi Akiva beperker belozer Aimer imloy hevi. If you didn't bring the kalim for the milah before Shabbos, you cannot be doiches Shabbos because those kalim the moil could have brought to the Beis Medrash or to wherever the bris would be. He could have brought it before Shabbos. Here there's no requirement whatsoever. I'm not sure exactly what it's referring to, but it's a Kiva Shita that you're not allowed to be doiches Shabbos to do a mitzvah that's doiches Shabbos if this particular preparation could have been done before Shabbos. Zok the heilige Mishnah weiter. Kol ha'menachos yesh bon ma'aseh kli b'fnim. What is a ma'aseh kli? So Rashi lisha v'aricha hakoil b'chleisharis b'fnim v'loi b'chutz. Once they mixed the flour with the oil, that prep that was done in the kleisharis, it was done b'fnim. Ve'ein bahen ma'aseh kli b'chutz. But they don't have ma'aseh kli b'chutz. There's nothing that makes it into Kedushas Aguf. There's no reason for it to be placed into a Klesharis out of the Azara. Shtei Alechem, going back to what we discussed yesterday, Orchon Shiva Tvachim, it was 7 Tvachim long, V'rachvan Dal Tvachim, and it was 4 Tvachim wide. So imagine it was about 4 inches wide, 5 inches wide, by about 2.5 feet long, and it was 7 Tvachim. I'm sorry, 7 Tvachim is about like 7 or 8 inches long. So 7 or 8 inches long by about 4 inches wide, and it had little points that had a little point on each corner. The kar noiseha arba etzbois. It had like a corner rising up from each corner, like a crown. It had a long extension of 4 etzbois, like a 4-inch horn on the corners. Lechem Hapanim, the Lechem Hapanim on the other hand, Orchon Yud Tvachim, it was 10 Tvachim long, V'rachban Hei Tvachim, and it was 5 Tvachim wide, V'karnoisav Sheva Etzbois. It had very long horns. Now, where were these horns? That if it had horns sticking up further, it would have went much higher than what the Gemara said. It was 15 Tvachim. So if I'm just going to show you a quick picture, the horns were folded down when they were baked; they were up. But when they were put on the shulchan, the horns were folded down. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shaloi Tita, I'm going to give you a remez that you should remember the dimensions of Sai the Shtei Alechem and Sai the Lechem Hapanim. The Shtei Alechem is Zayin Dalad Dalad, Zadad, because it's 7 long by 4 wide, and the karnos are 4 high. Yahaz is referring to the Lechem Hapanim. The Lechem Hapanim was 10 long and 5 wide, and the karnos were 7 high. Ben Zayma says, it says in the pasuk, "V'nesata al hashulchan lechem panim lifanai tamid." It's called a lechem with a face. Lechem panim sheyu loy panim. So Rashi panim the funness, it has to have walls. Lishnach v'nishi loy panim zaviyos. It should have these corners. V'heinei nakronis, that's referring to the kronis. Okay, so it seems like there's 2 pshatim in Rashi. If there's walls and horns, or if the walls are the horns.
I'm not getting this. How can there be horns if it has a flat face? Where are those horns?
So the article shows it like this.
Is that a picture of what is that a picture of exactly?
Of one of the Lechem Hapanim breads.
That's the shape of the bread?
Yeah.
I thought that was the shape of where the bread is baked.
You thought this looks more like the form than like the bread that was baked in the form.
That's right.
And this is what it looked like. We're used to the pictures of being flat, but now the Gemara says it had these 4 little corners that stuck out of it.
So that is a lechem itself. Okay. I have to adjust my brain here.
Because I'm on like the 3rd version of Salih Waffen base. I missed. If you could see, hey, look where my line is. It's all at the bottom. Okay, so Dr. Gemara weiter. So this is how they placed the Lechem Hapanim on the shulchan. Nosan archoi keneged roich b'shel shulchan. So let's say we're going to go according to the shita that the shulchan was an amma wide, an amma of 5 tvachim. So if it was an amma on 5 tvachim, and you're putting something that's 10 tvachim across it, it's going to hang over. It's going to hang over by 5 tvachim. If it's placed centered, it will hang over 2.5 tvachim on either side. The koifel tvachim umechzu mikan utvachim umechzu mikan, and you fold up the bread because it doesn't fit. You fold it up. It seems like we baked it that way because we already learned it's made in a form where it has 2 walls. Those 2 walls are each 2.5 tvachim high to make sure that the lechem hapanim will fit within the 5 tvachim of the width of the table. Nimta arkoi mimale rachvay shel shulchan. The length of the lechem hapanim filled the entire width of the shulchan, and then some, and that's why it was folded over. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. But Rabbi Meir Omer, the Amma that the Torah says, it was Amma Rachboy v'Amasayim Amma Rachboy and a Masayim Arkoi, that's an Amma of 6 tvachim. So therefore the shulchan was 6 tvachim wide and 12 tvachim long. That's what Rabbi Meir learned. HaShulchan Archa Yud Beis V'Rach Levav. They don't argue about the size of the lechem hapanim. He's merely arguing on the size of the shulchan, but that would now have a different layout. So therefore, lechem hapanim Archa Yud V'Rach Boi Hey. So nice and Archa connected Rach Boi Shel Shulchan. Now it only hangs over 4. So it's 2 on each side. So therefore, Koivel Tvachai Mikan V'Tvachai Mikan. Now, if I have 2 breads that are each 5 tvachim wide, but my table is 12 tvachim long, there's an extra 2 tvachim. That gap is left in between the 2 piles of the lechem hapanim. Utvachayim revach be'emtza kedei shetehei haruach min hasheves b'hem. To allow for air to flow freely through the 2 piles of bread, and this way, they wouldn't get moldy. Rashi adds in, the 2 sides of the breads stuck up 2.5 tvachim according to Rabbi Yehuda. Uvehen hakarnos, and those were the karnos. If you go vehen hakarnos, that's like one pshat of Rashi. Another pshat uvehen hakarnos. On top of these sides, there's even more the karnos. V'nim says a kuvais b'shava l'sfas hashulchan. Come to Chosh, when they're folded over, their width will be the exact width of the shulchan. What about if it's tzvina rekedes? Hava hanach the fanois holchois v'zoikvois b'shipua. So these walls wouldn't go straight up; they go up on an angle. Abba Shaul said, "Shom hayu noisnin shnei bezich halavayna." We know there were 2 spoons of levina. Where did you place them? That 2 tefachim gap is where they placed the 2 spoons. Amrullah, they told him, what do you mean? It's placed on one of the breads themselves, not in between. Amrulahem, you're assuming that al hamarachas means directly on. I'll show you al doesn't mean directly on. When it's talking about the distribution of the shavatim in the formation, it said on this mata was mata menashe. It wasn't one machne literally on top of the other machne. It means immediately following it, nearby. So al doesn't necessarily mean on. Al could mean nearby. Varba snifin shel zov hayusham. There were these 4 boards that made of gold, the 2 boards on either side of each lechem hapanim that went all the way up. Miflutzalen meirashem. It either means there were little pegs sticking out of it, and the pegs that stuck out of it held those konim, or it could be miflutzalen meirashem, could mean that they're drilled into, and the pipes that held up that separated between the rows of the lechem hapanim were inserted into those holes. So Rashi seems to learn that Mufutzala means Losses Roshei Hakonim Be'oison Pitzulim. So it's almost mashma that there's a little hole drilled in that the pipes were inserted into, rather than having a peg sticking out. Like when we, in our shrank, and when we have a sperm shrunk, we have a little peg that sticks into a hole that's drilled into either side, and that peg holds up the shelf, right? But the peg is held up because there's a little thing that sticks into a hole. So there was either one or the other. Either it had a peg sticking out, which would hold the konim, or the konim were longer than the width of the shulchan, and it was inserted on either side into holes into the board. Merashein, Shayusayim Chumehem, Shnayim L'Seder Zeh, Ushnayim L'Seder Zeh. 2 of these boards for each pile of lechem hapanim. V'chav ches kanim, there was a total of 28 pipes. Kechatzi kana, so it wasn't really a pipe, it was a pipe cut in half. Cholol was hollow. Arba osar l'seder zeh, yudal l'seder zeh. So just to set it up, if I have five rows of, if I have six rows of lechem hapanim, then I have 5 gaps in between them, right? There'll be 5 gaps in between 6 rows. So then if I need 3 per bread, that's 15. The terrace the top only had 2. So it was 3 times 4 is 12, plus 2 is 14. Okay. Loy seder kanim, v'loy niti losam doiches haShabbos. They couldn't set them up on Shabbos, and they couldn't take them off on Shabbos. So how would they dismantle it when they took the breads off? Elo nichnas my erev Shabbos v'shoimtai. Erev Shabbos, the Kohen Gadol would go in, or the Kohen would go in, and take apart these supports, and take out all the pipes. And they would just lie down on the floor, parallel to the shulchan. Which means over Shabbos, the breads were just piled up on top of each other. Because we're only worried about it getting spoiled if it's there for the whole week. Just over Shabbos, to have the breads directly piled one on another was not a concern. All of the kelim in the Beis Hamikdash, their length was connected to length, so they weren't placed perpendicular to the heichal. They were placed parallel. So their long dimension was parallel to the long dimension of the Mishkan, and their wide dimension was parallel to the wide dimension of the Mishkan. The exception to this is the Aron. The Aron, we know for sure, was placed, its length was to the width of the Beis Hamikdash. Because when the Kohen Gadol came in and looked at the Aron, it was wider than it was long. Zok the Gemara weiter. Kol ha-menachos yesh ben ma'isa kli mibifnim. Sha'alu es Rabbi, zuminayin. How do we know that Evi Mincha, they needed it in a keli? Zok ta'hilig Gemara. Amrlem, Rabbi told them simple. Hareyu oimer v'yoimer elai. Zeh mokim. This is in Yecheskel, where the Navi gives a clear description as to what the system was in the Beis Hamikdash, a shlishi that we should be carved b'zoichadu. Zeh mokim asher yivashlu sham ha'kohanim. It's the chatas es asham. This is the place where they're going to cook the chatas and asham. Just to get the accurate reading of the pasuk, I'm going to read it from the side. And asher yoifu es hamincha. So there's going to be a comparison between the preparation of the chatas and asham to the preparation of the mincha. Levilti hoitzi el hachatzer achitzayna lekadesh es ha'am. So Rabbi darshaned as follows: Mincha dumya da asham v'chatas. We're comparing the preparation of the mincha to the preparation of the asham v'chatas. Ma'asham v'chatas tunin kli. You can't possibly cook if it's not in a keli. You got to cook in a pot. So to the mincha nami tuna kli, it uses a keli, and this cannot mean the keli that the kamitza is placed into, because the kamitza of the mincha is like the shchita, and the placing of the kaimetz into the other klei sharis is keneged the kabbalah and the zrika, and therefore this has to be referring to the prep of the mincha. Okay, gewaltig. Zog the Gemara weiter. HaShulchan Archai Asar. The Shulchan was 10 tvachim long. Amar Rab Yochanan. L'divrei Amar tvachayim umechza. If it hung over by 2.5 tvachim, which was a Yehuda, kaifel, therefore you fold it over, and it goes up, it goes vertically 2.5 tvachim on each side. Nimsa Shulchan Mekadesh Chamisha Asar tvachim l'mayla. If you have 6 breads that are each 2.5 tvachim high, then the top bread will be, the top of the top bread is 15 tvachim. 2.5 times 6 is 15, which means the shulchan will be able to be mekadesh even breads that are piled up so high that they're 15 tvachim high. It's almost like I shouldn't say this, of the Princess and the Pea, right? That the top bread still impacted by the shulchan. Okay, gewaltig. L'divrei Amar tvachayim koifel. Nim the shulchan mekadesh yud test tvachim l'mayla. Yud base tvachim l'mayla. You only have proof that the shulchan can be mekadosh up to 12 tvachim. Fact Gemara, ve'ika kanim. There's a space in between the breads, so it's actually more than 12 tvachim or more than 15 tvachim. Zok Gemara kanim shkui mashkalahu. They actually created little grooves in the lechem hapanim so that the kanim did not add any height to the dimension. Frag the Gemara, my timer, mishum mapushe lechem. What are those kanim there for? To create a gap in between the breads. If they're going to be indented within the bread, so then it doesn't create that gap anymore. So Oiba Zoe, Soif come up Shalechem. Zaktamar, no, the Magvele Porta. The kanim, let's say the diameter of the kanim was an inch, for argument's sake. It wasn't indented a full inch into the bread below, so it should be flush. It was dented 9/10 of an inch. So maybe 1/10 of an inch is what the gap was created in between the two breads. Zok Gemara, but that's also an amount. Vayikahu Porta. So it's not 15, it's a little bit more than 15, the total height. Zok Gemara Eino Chanami. Kivan Deloi have a tavach lechoshavlei. We're only working in the whole numbers. If it's not a tavach, we're not counting that. Zok Gemara weiter. Aiva Ika Bazichin. Wasn't the Bazichin also placed on the Lechem Hapanim according to that Shita? Zok Gemara, Begavei the Lechem Havayasi. They were sitting within the breads. Ulavahade Lechem Havakaimi. And they were since they were on the Lechem, they would have been within the height. They'd be absorbed within that height. We just said the karnos sticking over and above the 2.5. So tomorrow karnos ligavei the lechem kayif lu. They would fold it over. They folded it over those horns. So maybe when they baked it, the horns pointed up, but when they put it into the shulchan, they pointed it down. The lechem alayu nach lay, and the lechem rests upon it. Right, Gemara, what about Valika Maskartoi? We know that the Shulchan had a rim that went around it. So if it's a tabletop, if the mascaris was on top of the tabletop, so there would be like a border around, just for argument's sake. Let's say it was an inch thick and it went all the way around. Envision a 2x4 standing up on its side is placed on the four corners of the mascaris. If that happens, now the lechem is moved up by a significant amount because the lechem doesn't sit flat on the tabletop. It sits on the rim that was placed around the tabletop, around the mascaris. Zok Gemara, Commanda Omar Miskartoi Limata Hoisa. If you hold it, it was only 15 that means we would hold that the mascaris was not above the tabletop, it was below the tabletop that ran from leg to leg. So imagine you take a 2x4, you stand it up. If you stand it up, it's 1.5 inches thick, but it's 3.5 inches high, and you nail that to the table legs right underneath the tabletop, and it went all the way around that way, which means that the tabletop was flat, and the lechem hapanim sat flat on the tabletop. Zogt Gemara veike miskarta, command Amar miskarta lamata hoisa. Lamanda Amar miskarta lamayla hoisa. But what about the man Amar holds that it was lamayla? Zogt Gemara perkude have mefarkeda. What they did is yes, they put a rim around, but the rim did not cover the tabletop. It was put at the edge of the tabletop and leaned out. So therefore, v'lechem begavei de shulchan hava Yosef. You were still able to put the lechem directly down on the shulchan, and it was not impeded by the mascaris, which was outside the perimeter. And the picture that the article has is right over here. So even though there was a mascaris around, but the mascaris was out of the perimeter of the tabletop, so it actually acted like a small little rim. And the bread was actually within. It was like a pool table almost. So they had a rim around, and it held up. It would hold up the. It would hold up the lechem upon it. Zok to Gemara v'lechem begavei del shulchan hava Yosef. Ki the Tanya like we learned. Rabbi Yosy Omer lo yisham snifen. Rabbi Yosy held that those two boards on the side of each row of lechem upon them did not exist. What held it up was that rim around. Which means it only held the bottom one in place. The top ones could not have been held in place that way. Amrulai, but the Tanaim will argue and hold miskarte lamata haisa. The miskeres was underneath the tabletop, and of course you had the two boards, the two snifin, like we have. So in fact, there's a machloikis as to whether or not they were even these snifin at all. Could be they were just the rim around it that held the bottom one in place. Now think about it. If you hold that the lechem hapanim was like a teva psucha, it would work. You pile them all up on top of each other. But if it was like a boat and you don't have the snifim on either side, it's impossible to pile them up one on top of the other. So Rashi points out that this shita, that the shita of Rabbi Yosy, that loyo yisnifen, el miskarta shal shulchan ma'amedes as a lechem, just a small rim, that only works if the lechem hapanim was like a box. Amar Rabbi Yechon, l'divrei Rabbi miskarta l'mata, hoisa tavla, l'divrei Rabbi miskarta l'mata, hoisa tavla misapechas tmeya. If the maskeres was below the tabletop, that means the tabletop was just basically a flat board. It was a flat board of wood, like a piece of plywood. And now you could put it on one way, or you could flip it over, because it's just a plain board. It's a tabletop that does not have any base kibble in it. It's a flat piece of wood that you can flip on either side. The top could be milchiks, the bottom could be fleishiks. I don't know if that works halachically. But if the miskeres was above the tabletop, then tavla misapechas tibaylach. Now we know the shulchan was makabel tumah. If we about to know the shulchan was makabel tumah, we know it's a keli. If the shulchan was constructed with a flat tabletop, and we know the shulchan became tamei, we know that a flat tabletop becomes tamei. But if the shulchan didn't have a flat tabletop, then we don't know any halacha regarding a flat tabletop from the shulchan, because the shulchan was not a flat tabletop. So therefore, if you held that the miskeres was above, and that created a base kibble on the tabletop, then tibaylach, then you would not know from the shulchan what the halacha would be by a tavla hamisapechas. Zok Gemara, your whole thing is predicated on the fact that you know that your shulchan is makabel tumah. How do you know the shulchan is makabel tumah at all? Mechlal the shulchan bar kibul tamu kliates ha'asui lenachasu. The shulchan is a kliates, it's shuta kliates that's not made to move around. You know, to make the be stationary. You don't move it around when it's loaded up. And we know, Pshuta Kliates, if it cannot be used, even when it's full, it's not a keli. And we learned that because it's compared to a sack when the Torah talks about the Dinei Tumah. It says, V'chol Kliates, ha'asul nachas, ein makabel tumah. So the shulchan is b'chlal not makabel tumah. Why is it not makabel tumah? My time, it the sack we in. Masak metaltel malay verekan. You have to be able to move it even when it's full and when it's empty. Avkam metaltel malay verekan. And the shulchan, when it's loaded up, you're not moving it. Zok Gemara, who said you're not moving it when it's loaded up? Shulchan nami metaltel malay verekan. They carried it malay verekan. Kidder Resh Lakish, like Resh Lakish taught us. Dama Resh Lakish, my dichsiv ala shulchan hatahar. What does it mean ala shulchan hatahar? It must be that the shulchan could become tamei, and the pasuk has to speak out and make sure when you're using the shulchan it's tar. Tar mechlal the tamei. So the question is, when did they ever move the shulchan around fully loaded? Elam alamit shemagbi and oisai la'oile regalim. When the oile regel came, they actually lifted up the shulchan fully loaded with the lechem, and they walked it to the door of the heichal, so that everybody would be able to see what was going on there. Because normally people didn't see what was going on with the lechem hapanim. Umarmin by lechem, they would show them the lechem hapanim that was steaming hot after being a week on the shulchan. Loves you. How do you see HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves you? K'divrei Reb Shua ben Levi, Reb Shua ben Levi, Neis Godel Nasa b'lechem hapanim, silukoi kisidurai. When they took it off, it was warm, piping hot, fresh, just like it was when they placed it on the shulchan. Shnemer losum lechem cham b'yom hilachai.
I'm presuming that's only by Rishon.
I don't know why Sheni didn't have a shulchan, or he didn't have all the nisim.
Yeah, I don't think there were many nisim there.
Well, it's interesting because here it says it's in, this is in Shmuel, so Shmuel would have been relative to Bayis Rishon.
Yeah,
but Shmuel was
Shmuel, no, he wasn't
even around then.
He wasn't alive, but it had a mishkan.
I had a different question. We just learned 2 days ago that when they transported the shulchan, they left the lechem hapanim on it, and they took it as is.
I thought of that also.
So what do you mean
No?
it's not carried mole v'reikon?
Right.
Unless maybe the shulchan in the Mishkan is not being questioned over here. Maybe the shulchan in the Beis Hamikdash, which never had to be transported, maybe that's what it's referring to. I guess it wasn't the same shulchan. It must have been a different shulchan.
Most of the kalim were different. Shlomo Melech's kalim were much different than the.
Okay, so then it makes sense.
Than the Mishkan, yeah.
The fact that the shulchan was transported to the Mishkan doesn't have a bearing on this. It wasn't plain wood; it was gold coated. So that metal is makabel tuma. Zok Gemara Miloitan. Didn't we learn hashulchan v'adulbaki? If you have a flat tabletop, dulbaki is a sheet of leather that was used as a tabletop. Shenivchasu, that broke. Oy shechipan b'shayish, or you coated it, you plated it. Now here, the plating of marble is not makabel tuma. We're discussing the plating of gold, which we're saying should be makabel tuma. But the Mishnah that we're quoting is talking about a coating that was not makabel tuma. If shayir bahen mokam anachas koisais, if it's not completely coated with shayish, which is not makabel tuma, there is some space on it that you could still use it for its original intent. That's the original wood. Then tmeim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, it doesn't be hanachas koisais; it's a mokam anachas chatichos. But shayir in loy shayir loy, you clearly see that the tabletop, the coating is what we look at. And if it's coated, we look at it like it's all marble, and there wouldn't be makabel tuma. So in our case, but a shulchan, even though it's made out of wood, and the wood itself is a makabel tuma, but it's plated with gold, and as the Brisa says, you look at the coating. So therefore, maybe it's makabel tuma because of the gold coating. V'chitema, and if you're going to say there the coating is mevatel the actual keli, you know why? It was nailed on. If it's nailed on, that's a permanent coating. But maybe the gold plating of the shulchan was not nailed on. It was easy to just remove it, but that's not true. Because Rish Lakish was clearing that we say that tzipui is mevatel the keli underneath it. Does that even apply to a tzipui that's not nailed on? Or does it only apply to a plating that's nailed on? So Rish Lakish wasn't so sure what the halacha was, so you can't be so sure either. It was it b'shchifa es levizvin, if it wrapped around the edges as well, oy b'shaloi chipa es levazvin. V'amer lei, and Rabbi Yochanan paskin for Rish Lakish, loish na tzipu oymid v'loish na tzipu shein oymid. It doesn't matter if the plating is adhering to the table with nails, or if it's just loose plates that could be removed. Loish na chibas levazvin v'loish na loy chibas levazvin. Doesn't matter if the plating of the cover of the table went up the sides or not. Either way, it's going to be mevatlet. So our shulchan, you can't bring a ride that's makabel tuma. Maybe it's the gold that's makabel tuma. If you're going to say, yeah, a normal thing that's coated, it's bottled to the coating. But the shulchan was made of atzeshitim, which is very expensive wood, that wouldn't be bottled to its coating. That's good according to Shlokas, because Shlokas says what type of kalim are bottled to their plating? Cheap kalim made of achas lagos, avaklimasmes, which are much more expensive. Chashivi v'leibatli shaper. So you could make that distinction, and therefore you could say that the shulchan wasn't bottled to the gold covering, and the only reason why the shulchan was makabel tuma was because they carried it out and showed everybody. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, who said that everything's bottled to the coating, you have no raya whatsoever from the shulchan that the coating is mevatel the keli, and that the shulchan was tummy only because of its gold. Michael Meimar Zok Gemara Shani Shulchan the Rachmana Kar Yates. The Torah refers to the shulchan as H. Shenemar Hamizbeach Eitz Shalosh Amos Gavoya Arkoi Shtayim Amos Shalosh Amos Gavoya Arkoi Shtayim Amos Umiktzais Loy had edges of Arkoi Vikirois of Eitz. So the pasuk starts off referring to this as a mizbeach, but it's talking about the shulchan because the pasuk continues and says, "V'yidaber Elai zeh hashulchan al shelef Hashem." So you see, since it's called eitz, therefore it's not bottled to its planing, because the Torah calls it a shulchan aves. Now the Gemara has an aside point. Pasach b'mizbeach v'sayim b'shulchan. Why would be referring to the word shulchan with the word mizbeach? A shulchan and a mizbeach are two different things. For that we have a dvar musar. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Lozer are mitavayu b'zman shebeis hamikdash kayim mizbeach mechaper al adam. But now we win of beis hamikdash. How do we get our kapara? How do we bring our karbonos? V'yachshav she'en beis hamikdash kayim shulchanai shel adam mechaper alav. Our shulchan is mechaper. Our shulchan is when we invite people over and we use our table to sacrifice our comfort and to bring in other people who are less fortunate. If a person eats with the right kavana, if a person eats with the machshava of doing it l'shem shemaim, all these things are just like a mizbeach. We should be zeicher to have the real mizbeach b'karv mamish.
Yeah.